How Labour Built Neoliberalism, Australia's Accord, the Labour Movement and the Neoliberal Project by Dr. Elizabeth Humphreys. Now, Humphreys, both when it was published and even still to this day, has garnered a bit of backlash from that title and even the cover. Unfortunately though, she hasn't been attacked for the actual body of work in of itself in its own right, but rather for her affiliation to the think tank the Australia Institute. And supposedly working or being affiliated with the Australia Institute means you're anti-Labour and therefore anti-union. So before I review the book, it's really worth mentioning that A, her PhD thesis, which became the book, was published well before she got involved with the Australia Institute, and B, her work with the Australia Institute is solely collaborative research with other unions like the UWU, the TWU, and the CFMEU. Like sure, it's collaborating with the Australia Institute, but it's more union work than any of the people who criticize her for doing it will ever do in their lives. With all that being said, why is How Labour Built Neoliberalism such an important read? Well, it explains why Australian society is the way it is today and how we got here through explaining the various social forces that got us here. How do unions, how do working class organizations go from being so impactful and so influential to not being so? Humphreys outlines what neoliberalism actually is, what it looked like in Australia, and how the union movement was at the vanguard of neoliberalization, which meant the decline of the union movement. Why was it the Australian Labor Party under Bob Hawke and Paul Keating who ushered in a political and economic paradigm that demobilizes and minimizes the role of unions in society? That's the question that Humphreys rigorously answers throughout the book. She uses Antonio Gramsci's concept of involucro to analyze the prices and incomes accord, an agreement between the Labour Party and the unions whereby the unions basically agreed to demobilize and stop going on strike for a better deal, and the Labour Party in turn promised to implement what was called the social wage when they got into office. So things like Medicare, superannuation, welfare benefits, housing, etc. One of the most significant contributions of the book is explaining just exactly why the bulk of the union movement stayed with the ALP during a process by which the Labour Party was implementing policies antithetical to unionism, causing irreparable damage to the union movement in society, rendering them no longer an influential part of social life. Humphreys shows that it was either changing the activity of unions from being workplace-centric to state-centric, or for the ones that didn't cooperate, beating them with a stick, arresting organizers, deregistering unions, sending in the military to crush strikes,